for those of you that may not know, because you're new to the show or whatever, obviously the Marine Corps has always been a big part of my life. I originally enlisted in high school and then went through Navy ROTC Marine option, got commissioned in '89, retired actually August of 2009. So my retirement date's coming up. And it's funny sometimes how the Marine Corps is a small world. And so one of the folks I worked with when I was at my last duty station at the Marine Special Operations Command was at the time a Major Russell Worth Parker, and he's gotten into the writing world post-Marine Corps. And so he, worked with Tom on this book. And so when I saw that, I said, hey, I'd love to get this story out because I think this is very important, because one of the things that we don't always realize is one, the American, fighting person does a lot for this country, right? We've got young men and women that put their life on the line so that we can be free and we can do things like shop on Amazon and have our different perspectives. And we do it without question. We do it. And I think a lot of times these folks, when they're on the battlefield, they're not necessarily doing it for mom and apple pie. They're doing it to that person to their left and to their right because they want them to go home. And, Major Tom Schueman has been a part of this, since 2008 is when he went to the basic school, became a Marine officer. And really, he's got a fascinating story because it's not your typical story. I mean, his mom didn't want him to join the Marines, right? She wanted to have anything to do with the military. And God bless her, Tom, I admire what your mom has done as a Chicago police officer to help raise you and your sibling. And so, his father, was incarcerated in Georgia, but they still post that time were able to reconnect. And I just think, I have a lot of admiration for Tom in reading this book, but also as we're going to learn about his interpreter, Zak, and that's what a lot of this is going to be about. So I don't spoil the whole thing, though, Chris. We probably should get Tom on here. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome an American patriot, active duty Marine, Major Tom Schueman, the operations officer for 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Tom, thanks for being here today.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Tom, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, because Marines don't like to write, right? So you wrote a book about this. This obviously is something you're very passionate about. What made you think to go down this route?
Sure. I first want to address one of your comments in the opening monologue there when you said that, they preserve the liberty so that we can shop on Amazon. And it reminds me of when people say America's not at war, America's at the mall, the Marines are at war, and it's used to be this disparaging comment. And I always say, wouldn't we prefer it that way? Wouldn't we? Do you want what's the alternative? Have America at the war? It's the very reason that we have the Marines is so that America can go to the mall. I don't want my little sister at the war. I don't want my grandma at the war. I want. And so the idea is that we volunteer to preserve those liberties and those freedoms so you can shop wherever you want, go wherever you want, and continue to live your way of life. And that we'll carry the fight where we need to. And so I just that sticks out. Why did we write the book? I don't know if I'm an anomaly in terms of being a Marine and who likes to write. I have found that more and more Marines are thinkers and are interested in developing that lethal mind. And so there are definitely some stereotypes about Marines, and there's a bad joke about crayons. But I'll tell you that I find more and more Marines who are interested in reading and writing and really smart. And so I had the opportunity to go to graduate school at Georgetown. I got to study literature. And then I got the opportunity to teach at the Naval Academy for a couple of years. And then I got sent back to another school, the Naval War College, get another graduate degree. So I had 4 years. So the Marine Corps was just paying me to train my brain or help other people read and write. And so I have been drawn to writing for sure, both professionally and personally. We wrote this book, I think, that highlights some stories about the heroes in our lives. And so I start that by talking about my mom a little bit. I have an opportunity to talk about some young men who are heroes of mine that I served with in Afghanistan. And then we end the book talking about some heroes who, in the midst of a sea of tragedy out there outside of the airport in Kabul, there were some young men and women who held the line and demonstrated what it means to be no better friend all the way up until the end. And so we wanted to kind of convey some stuff about friendship, some stuff about promises, and I think that's what compelled us to write the book.
Yeah, and when you talk about promises, I think that's part of the story with you and Zak, right? When you left, right, you were going to do everything you could to help him, and as things have, if you want to say, as things kind of started to fall apart as we know it in Afghanistan, right? You kind of, took to the cause of like, hey, I promised this guy I was going to help him, and you're not going to let him down. No different than, how I think most, the ethos of us as Marines is, right? We're always going to be there for our fellow Marine and help them no matter what. We don't leave anyone on the battlefield. And this is no different because Zak, and you talk about in the book, even though he's, not a Marine, he became a part of that brotherhood. And he put his life on the line for you. I remember reading that part where like you hit that IED and you like didn't know what happened. And there he is standing over you, protecting you when he could have very easily just taken off. And so he's a very unique individual. And I have so much respect for the man that he is.
Sure. Another point from your opening monologue, I was paying close attention. As you know, you said we don't necessarily just fight for apple pie and whatever ideals that. And so there's a great passage in one of my favorite books that I taught at the Naval Academy, Gates of Fire. And there's a platoon commander, Dionysius, in that. And he says, forget what you think you fight for. Forget God, country, or any other higher noble virtues that you think that you fight for. For today, what you fight for is the man to your left and to your right, for he is everything and everything is contained within him. And that is when you're in the trenches, when you got your bayonets fixed, that is truly what you are fighting for in that moment. And keeping our promises, the book is titled Always Faithful, which is taken from the Marine Corps' motto, Semper Fidelis, which is Latin. And so to me, it's easy to be faithful most of the time. I think most people can be mostly faithful. I think where you want to put the emphasis is on the semper or put the emphasis on the always. And it's rare, I think, for people to be 100% faithful 100% of the time. And it's because when you're tested and when you meet that adversity and when you meet those challenges, some people will abandon their post. But if Semper Fidelis is more than just a bumper sticker, if it's more than a catchphrase, it has to mean something. It has to be an ethos and a way of life. And that means no matter what. And so that's really, it's just me attempting to live this motto of what we ascribe to or what we say. And so Zak undoubtedly did that, as you alluded to, on the battlefield with us. And it was my duty. I was honor bound to fulfill the promises that our nation made to him.
I have so much admiration for that and for what you're doing right now. And so, when we talked about this a little bit before the show, I mean, a lot of this, it really all started with 9/11. And we went into Afghanistan and we did what we could to give these people a chance at a better way of life. And so it was people like Zak that, as they were growing up, saw this, right? We saw, we talked about, Chris, you don't have daughters, so I could say you're fortunate, unfortunate. But women were not allowed under the Taliban to learn. So even if it was only for a couple decades, and I love that you brought this up when we were talking earlier, they were given some opportunities that are life-changing. And so even though things are changing right now, we don't know what's going to happen. There are some Afghani women, right? Because they've grown up, that were able to get education. Even men like Zak were able to get an education that they previously weren't able to do. So, I think, like we talked, I wouldn't say that this was all for naught. But I think now what you and others, and myself included, would say is we do have a duty to help those that helped us. And that's part of, I think, why you've written this book. And we're going to talk about later on some of the things we can do to help Zak, because even though Zak is here in the U.S. right now, there is a possibility that he may not be able to stay. And so I just wanted to kind of hit on that a little bit, but would love to hear your thoughts on that, Tom.
Zak, in 2001, Army Special Forces started to show up to his province. And so he was about 11 years old. And he saw a change in his province for the better. You can read it in his chapters, this alternating narrative between he and I. He has a chapter and I have a chapter. And he'll say that the soldiers showed up, they were handing out notebooks, pens, they built schools, they built government buildings, they provided different liberties, freedoms, and opportunities that we had never experienced under the Taliban. And so Zak said, I should help. I should help these guys. Not because I want to go to America, but because I want this for my country. And so Zak's service with the U.S. forces was never, his intent was never to do that so he can get to America. His intent was to do that so he can have a brighter future in his own country, a country that he loves. And so, he is a beneficiary of some of the things that were provided with the support of the U.S. And he was determined to provide those opportunities throughout the rest of his country. And so that's really what was the impetus for him to sign up with us and to fight alongside us. And for a moment in time, there were glimmers of hope, and things, and the quality of life was a little bit better. And that matters, to me, that mattered to him. And unfortunately, the situation changed. His persecution became so oppressive, so dangerous that he at some point in 2016 said, I don't have a hope or a future here. I can't even leave my house without being the threat of being killed. The Taliban were leaving night letters at his home. They were calling him, they poisoned him. And he said, I did all this so that I could have a better future here and so that I could raise a family here. But I at this point, I'm afraid I'm going to get my head cut off if I leave my village. And so that's when he reached out to me in 2016 and said, hey, can you help me apply for this visa program? And the U.S. established this visa program specifically because we knew our allies would end up being persecuted. And so in order to garner their support, we said, hey, if you support us for 12 months, we'll provide you a pathway to citizenship. There's this visa program because we know that you will become a marked man. We know that you'll be hunted because you worked with us. And so we'll alleviate that by creating this visa program. And so 12 months, handshake, contract signed. And in Zak's case, he ended up serving almost 4 years with U.S. forces. But 6 years later, he still doesn't have his visa.
Incredible. And Major, there's a lot of folks that are hearing some of this for the first time. For those of us who, have written or have read the book. And by the way, the Good Morning America story, I dragged my wife in front of the television and I said, hey, we have an opportunity to interview this gentleman who's on Good Morning America. And I think you might be interested in it. And as soon as that thing was over, she was like, where's the book? I got to read this. And so you touched on a lot of things in the book, and I think some people are like, wait a minute, you're talking about this guy Zak. Like it seems like we're maybe I don't want to assume that people understand sort of how we got to where we're at. Him being the interpreter, him being a part of this, the book itself being, like you had mentioned, It starts with a chapter from Zak, then goes to a chapter of you. So it's a point of view of him, then a point of view of you, and does that alternation. So it's just, and it starts on 9/11. It starts where, where he's at and where you're at in high school, and when this is happening and how it unfolded and how it impacted you, a very unlikely Marine at that point, right? Who knew that you were going to be what you were going to be, but it affected you in such a way and took you to that, and then took you to what many call one of the most deadliest deployments in this longest war that we've had, right? And so I just want to pull that context in because, we understand that because we've read the book, but there's a lot of people that are like, wait a minute, so, if you could just maybe summarize some of that stuff so we can sort of get into it in terms of, the story of that, and maybe, kind of talk about how Zak and you were involved in the time that you were together while you were there in Afghanistan.
Sure. I mean, the origin story there is as you mentioned, our path towards intersecting started on September 11th, 2001. I never had any interest in serving. I wasn't playing with GI Joes growing up. I didn't think, I didn't have a long family history of military. I just left the Naval Academy a year or two ago, where almost every midshipman has their dad or their uncle or some kind of connection. That wasn't me. But at the conclusion of 9/11, on the conclusion of that day, I was living in the age of, you could say, innocence or ignorance, and I didn't know that there were people in the world that wanted to do us harm. And then I said, well, if there are people who want to take these liberties from us, there have to be people who defend and preserve them. You should be one of those people. And that was kind of my first step. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know I was going to be a Marine. I probably didn't even know that there was a Marine Corps. And so that was kind of my first step. And for Zak, it was, he had not heard much about America or didn't know a whole lot about America, but he knew, he talks about the shared humanity, irrespective of religion or culture, that we're all humans. And he said he found that tragic that, many men and women went to work that day and were killed. And so he said, and when he sees the soldiers show up a couple months later, and he said, these are the people that Al Qaeda attacked. Like, I want to try to help. And so that's what put us on a path towards meeting in October of 2010. And so we meet there, as you referenced. It was the deadliest battlefield in the longest war of our country. It was very kinetic, extremely violent place, and most interpreters at the time were quitting. They didn't want to stick around when they got to saying in Afghanistan. And so Zak shows up. He knows the local dialect. He speaks English very well. He's able to help me understand cultural nuances. He's able to help mitigate some of the cultural blind spots for me. When we enter into a village to speak with the local people, he's able to help me read the situation and point me in a certain direction and direct the conversation in a way that's helpful. And so he's doing all those kind of things, which are probably within the billet description or the job duties of a interpreter. He's translating, but very quickly he became so much more to the platoon, whether that's him sprinting through a minefield to detain the Taliban commander, or as we mentioned, when I was wounded, him being there and holding security. There's any number of examples where he exceeded his duties as an interpreter, and that's where he really started to become part of the platoon and a brother to us, and that's kind of the genesis there.
Got it. And technically he wasn't trained, necessarily to be a soldier. It's not like he was carrying a weapon, and so talk about developing that trust with Zak. Like what was maybe how did you first determine, like, this is somebody that I can absolutely trust to be by my side to do what we all need to do?
Sure. I at that point, about 2.5 years of training as an infantry Marine, where I'm clearing trenches and doing medical training and reacting to an ambush. And so Whereas our interpreters, they're just regular. Zak before that did construction and farming, and he had 0 days of military training, and then he's in the middle of a firefight. So that is a pretty steep learning curve. And most interpreters in those situations became liability. They would lay down, and then you try to move, and then you have to go back and get them. And but Zak kind of from the onset was there, really right beside us, and that trust forms. Shared misery builds camaraderie. Shared adversity builds trust, and so the fact that he was shouldering the load, the fact that he was accepting all the same risks, and really fighting just step for step alongside us, that's what will really foster a lot of that trust.
Yeah, and I think that that's something too that you don't always see. I remember reading in the book. It's like I think you felt like you struck gold, but it's like you didn't want everyone to know that you had a good interpreter because somebody else might try to take him from you. And I thought that was, you want to say there's a little bit of humor in the book. That's what I thought was kind of funny. It's like, hey, I got this guy that actually knows what he's doing, and I think a couple of times he's doing okay, but you didn't want people to know that he was better than that.
Yeah, a good interpreter is worth their weight in gold, and everybody's having the same struggle of finding someone who's willing to go out on these dangerous patrols. And because so few people what you were left with is often people who either didn't speak English or didn't speak the local dialect. So now you're kind of screwed. And so if word got around that, hey, we had this guy who was incredibly brave and actually really skilled linguist, your captain or your battalion commander or someone else, I'd say, oh, that guy's should come work for me. And so that's what happened to us, a little shade at MARSOC. We had this great military working dog named Back, and this German Shepherd with his the Corporal Roberts. They find every IED, and they were great. And then the reports got around that we had this super skilled team, and before you knew it, they got on a helicopter and went to work for somebody else. So yeah, you had to be careful.
For those of you who are just joining us, so live and or on replay, or we also repurpose this into an audio podcast later. We're speaking to Major Tom Schueman, who's written the book "Always Faithful," available just recently on Amazon. So if you come over to dealcasters.live, we've got it available here in the carousel. And so Tom, I wanted to, I know we're jumping around timeline wise here. I'm sorry. Did I miss something funny?
Yeah, I shared something from Worth that he told Tom, easy on the MARSOC shade. So I just thought he'd get a kick out of that.
Shots fired.
Yeah, you guys. Yeah, I was going to say.
You'll understand, Chris, is that Marines, we always like to I'll just say bust on each other because I have to remember where we are.
I'm going to bust away. Bust away. So we talked a little bit about Dark Horse and what happened there. Can you talk about some of the stuff without giving away too much from the book, but like November 9th, 2010, maybe a story around that?
Sure. November 9th started off pretty terribly. I received the news that a good friend of mine, Robert Kelly, who's also a platoon commander, prior enlisted guy, he had been killed in action. So that was tough. And then one of my squads went out, and a Marine on that patrol was injured. And so then they couldn't get back to the base with that Marine who was injured. The Taliban kept ambushing them along the way. And they said, hey, can someone come out and help us get this guy out? And so I left with a squad to go alleviate some of the pressure from the squad with the wounded Marine. And they got back, and as we started to head back to the base, the patrol was ambushed. And as I converged with my sergeant, who was my squad leader, Trey Humphrey, he stepped on an IED, and so he was wounded. My platoon sergeant was right there as well. He was wounded, and I was blown up one way. And so, as I regained consciousness, I see Zak there holding security, looking out for me. I see one of my team leaders who's already stepped up and assumed all the responsibilities of the squad leader, Corporal Leahy. instinctively, intuitively just stepped up and next man up. That's what we train for in the Marine Corps, that one bullet away mentality. And you saw how well Sergeant Humphrey had trained that Marine to take his place, but also just how talented that Marine was, that he'd already called in the medevac and was setting security and that kind of stuff. And when I went over and I saw Sergeant Trey Humphrey, and he was missing his leg. My platoon sergeant was so concussed that he couldn't stand up or get up. And these are two men who I deeply, dearly loved. And we got Sergeant Humphrey onto the we call it a litter stretcher. We got him onto the stretcher, and as we were carrying him off the battlefield, he kept turning to me and saying, "Hey, sir, I know I'm heavy. Why don't you guys just put me down and take a break?" And it was clear he was missing. I mean, he's not in good condition. Missing a leg. His other leg had been badly injured. And I was saying, "Humphrey, we're not going to put you down. We're going to get you to the helicopter." And he said, "No, sir. I know I'm heavy. Just put me down." And here's a Marine who, while he was in flight, once he got on the helicopter, he died. And he had to be resuscitated. And so when we think of this phrase "always faithful," this is the embodiment of it. It's a person who, preceding their death, their thoughts are with the people around them, and that's the Marine sergeant. That's the young Marine. That's the people that it was important to capture the stories, to tell the stories of what it actually means to be always faithful, and someone who, in the moments preceding their death, when their thoughts are not with them but with others. It's a rare breed, but you'll find it everywhere in the Marine Corps infantry ranks, and I'm fortunate to have been able to serve alongside of some of these heroes.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate too, because a lot of times, and I think that's one of the reasons, like you said, you did this, that story never gets told. And I think that you did these men a great honor by, remembering them, because, their families are always going to remember them, but for their families, maybe even to get a little bit more closure, that knowing that someone, remembers their sons for the great men that they were, I think is definitely something important that we should never lose sight of. And that also reminds me, you're involved with an organization. I hope I'm not going to butcher the name, but I think it's Patrol Base Abate. Is that right? Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. At Georgetown, I got to study moral injury and trauma narratives, and I looked at Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. I looked at the Vietnam canon of literature and film, and there's a lot about this concept of moral injury, or feelings of betrayal, feelings of shame, and how that manifests in pretty unhealthy ways. And in April of 2020, I had 3 Marines commit suicide. And one of them was a particularly tough one, in that he had extended for that deployment at my request. And so when I found out that he had passed, I started to read the VA suicide literature, the Veterans Administration suicide literature, about what's going on here. And what I found was that feelings of disconnectedness and isolation are the leading proximal cause of veterans suicide. So veterans who are feeling alone or disconnected are the ones who are most likely to commit suicide. So, and then there was one other nugget in there that I found pretty interesting, in that there was no correlation between combat veterans and suicide. That actually non-combat veterans were twice as likely to commit suicide. So I said, okay, well, what resources are out there that are getting all veterans? If it's a veteran issue, what resources are out there that get all veterans in community, get all veterans connected? And what I found is that about 99% of the veteran service organizations out there are allocated to about 1% of the veteran population, and that's our wounded and our special forces. Now, I celebrate that. I think that wonderful that our nation is committed to supporting the folks who make the biggest sacrifice, our special forces guys and our wounded. It's important that we take care of them. But I feel like there was space to maybe open the aperture a little bit. And what I found is many of these organizations, you had to check a box or jump through a hoop. You had to have a disability or a disorder. You had to, and it was all these ways to kind of exclude you from joining into that community and getting into that connection. And to me, whatever community you were in while you served, whatever MLS, whatever Air Force, Army, National Guard, Reserves, you were part of a tribe where everybody in that squad, in that unit, was willing to die for the other person. And I think that is unique. And I think it's hard to find that level of tribe outside of the military. And so as human beings, we all have the need for connection. It's not just a military thing. I would just argue it's intensified through service. Then we're also issued a purpose. Every man needs a purpose. And so we say, here's your mission. And we give you a task and we say, here's the purpose of that. Here's the why this is important. And so whether you're a mechanic, whether you're a truck driver, whether you're the chef or the communication specialist, all of us had this tribe and all of us had some type of purpose. And so I think it's natural to struggle with that as you transition from service. And so what I wanted to do is kind of get preemptive and proactive and say, hey, whether you're the PFC, private, first class, or Air Force, or reservist, or National Guard, if you raise your right hand, we've got a space for you within this organization, and we recognize that your service matters, and not that you're special, but that service in and of itself matters. And so what we did is we got a 350 acre ranch out in Montana, and we said, let's do the thing that you're into, whether that's yoga, music, art, literature, jujitsu, weightlifting. We bring folks out and we just say, hey, so long as you served, you're in. It's free of cost. We fly you out, we pick you up, and we do the thing that you're into. We do that outside in nature around a campfire, and we get back into serving and connecting and building that community again. And undoubtedly, it has been transformational. The community that's formed out there on the mountain in Montana has been it's just been nothing short of incredible. And so I'm fortunate to walk point or fill a sandbag within this organization, Patrol Base Abate.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That's incredible. And I not too long ago, I went on a vacation to Montana, and that is, people talk about God's country. I mean, when you look, to your left and your right, and it looks like a painting. That's
Yep.
just a glorious, like transcendental, like amazing place for someone to be. So it's like, taking someone physically and putting them in that kind of place, and just that alone sometimes can do that. And I love how you talked about purpose and you talked about community, but especially how it applies to someone who has been in the service, because like you said, it's amplified, right? It's like times, however many zeros you want to put after the number one, right? But now, for those of us who haven't had the opportunity to serve, those things are still important. They're important for you now. They're important for you to look to be a part of community, to take care of yourself, so you're not in a situation where you're struggling with your mental health. And I love that you're shining a light on that for everyone, but especially for those that are have been a part of the service. And it's incredible that you said that. Because I think for someone like myself and probably most others, it's the ones that were in combat that you would think would be just most traumatized or maybe have that sort of feeling, but it's not. It's just in general, which is incredible. Any reason why you think that is? Just because it's like once they get into the other world or whatever, that it's just not the way it was, or?
Sure. Combat has a general stigma and negative connotation that surrounds it. I would say that undoubtedly there's a thing called post-traumatic growth that you experience while you're in combat, and that the adversity and the hardship that you experience in combat are educational, and that you can learn more in just 60 seconds in a firefight than you can maybe in a decade of study. And so there's so many lessons that you can learn while you're under fire and while you're in that experience that actually they refine your soul, they refine your character, and that for me, I've got to a place of gratitude and growth from those experiences in combat that I'd say I'm thankful that I had that hardship and that I wouldn't be the man that I am without it. So really, I think combat often helps you build resilience in your character, and so that's part of it. And then the other part might be is just that there's not the same resources allocated to those who haven't gone to combat, and so maybe the combat veteran is able to tap into a larger resource network, which then maybe mitigates some of the risk factors, whereas the non-combat veterans are just expected to say, hey, everything's fine. And again, it's that transition. It's an identity crisis. I wore we all wear a uniform where over our left heart it says U.S. Marine, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, right? And we're indoctrinated into this culture. But when you transition, you're just handed a piece of paper and you're told you're not that person anymore. And there's no indoctrination into the civilian sector. And so I think there's a natural kind of soul searching and identity crisis that occurs upon transition for every service member, irrespective of if they're in combat or not in combat.
Yeah, I would agree. I think even for me, Chris, like I've told you, it's like being retired almost 13 years. It's like you kind of go through that struggle of like, I don't want to go around telling people like, I'm a retired Marine. It's like I just want people to accept me for me. But then that time in the service is always a part of you. It shaped you. Going to Paris Island and for 13 weeks and then going through OCS and the basic school, that is something that shaped me and molded me. The people I served with that, had my back and vice versa is always going to be a part of me. In fact, sometimes it's not even so much that you miss the service, you miss the friendships, you miss that connection. And I think that's where sometimes people struggle because it's like they may not have been in combat, but now they don't have that group of people that they can fall back on. And I think that's very interesting. I did not know that part of it, Tom. I always thought it was more related to the folks that was more combat related. But that definitely veteran suicide is a huge problem. But I did want to go back to part of the reason we wanted to have you on here is let's talk about the challenge that Zak is having and how we can help there and maybe let people know what exactly is going on with the Zak, who, as far as I'm concerned, he served not only his country, but he served our country in what he did with the Marines for those years.
Undoubtedly, he served our country. I mean, there are Americans who are alive today, me one of them, because of Zak's service to our country. So, again, in 2016, his persecution became so intense that he can no longer pursue a life in Afghanistan, which I think that was a horrible realization for him. Someone who had invested so much in his country's future to not be able to try to enjoy that. And so he started this visa application in 2016, and we spent the next 12 months sending letters and revising the application, and we made no progress, none. And so after a year of trying to do appeals and everything that we could, Zak said, I've got to try to figure out how I'm going to continue my life here, because it's clear that no matter what we try to say or do, it's not going to work out. And so which is very frustrating, because the requirement for this visa program was 12 months. And we put this visa program in place for people like Zak who were being persecuted. And so the idea is you serve with the U.S., we do a handshake and we say, because of this service and because we know you'll be persecuted for it, we'll provide you a pathway to citizenship. And Zak did his part. He did almost 4 years, and then we weren't honoring our part of that deal. And so Zak and I stayed in touch. But then when the announcement was made that we would withdraw from Afghanistan by the end of last summer, that announcement was made in April, I put out just a call to help on social media. And I said, hey, here's this guy who's done incredible stuff for our country. He rates this visa. Can anybody help me get him the visa? Because if he doesn't, he's going to be killed. And there was an incredible wave of support, bipartisan, both parties, Republican, Democrat, throwing their weight behind this. Highest levels of media were backing us. And despite this massive wave of support, we actually didn't make any progress through the system. And And so Zak, when it became apparent that the Taliban were going to take Afghanistan, I said, hey, you got to get to Kabul and you got to get to the airport, and we've got to figure out a way to get you out. And so the book chronicles this experience of him leaving Kunar, going to Kabul, and then his 3 attempts at the airport. And just him leaving Kunar, I think, in and of itself is a really heroic act on his behalf. To say goodbye to his mother, to his family, knowing that he will likely never see them again, on a hope and a dream of providing a safe and secure future for his children. I think that giving his nieces and nephews a kiss goodbye, I mean, that in and of itself, I think, was an incredibly courageous and hard decision. And then what he experienced in Kabul as the government collapsed was, harrowing. And in the book, we chronicle the 3 different attempts for him to escape out of the airport. And what I kind of, for context, I think any parent that's trying to take small kids to the airport, no, it's tough. Now you've got 4 kids under the age of 5. That's really tough. Now you got to walk to the airport with 4 kids under 5 and your 4 bags. Very, very tough. Now there's also 100,000 people at that airport, all trying to get at the same time, where children were actually being trampled. And so as a dad, everything in you as a dad is to protect and provide. And now you're bringing your children into this chaos where kids are getting trampled. Now you add in the fact that his children were seeing people get killed with machine guns. And so you add all that in, and you can imagine how trying that must have been for Zak in those moments to just, and all he wanted, what we all want, is an opportunity, security for our family. And so it's truly a testament to his dedication to his children, to his family, to get them out of that and into a better life. And the book chronicles just how harrowing those escape attempts were and his ultimate rescue.
And so now, as Jim had mentioned, he is still without a visa, and in the seemingly I don't know what word, ridiculous, like red tape or whatever that's preventing this from happening. I think when people are hearing the story that you have to share, reading this book, I know that the first inclination for myself, for my wife, other people that I've talked to about it is, well, what can I do? Right? Here I am, just, person X in, city Y and, whatever. This is impacting me. What can I do? Is there something that someone who's listening right now and if buying the book is something that does help, cool. But certainly it is available here on Amazon, but what else can people do? Is it writing letters to their Congress people? Is it maybe talk a little bit about what someone can do that hears the story and is impacted by it?
Yeah, I think we should all feel some righteous indignation about the way that we're treating our allies. It's if you look at historically, we've always relied upon our allies to help us fight wherever we go to fight. And if you look to the future, we'll undoubtedly need our allies again. And so you've got to keep your promises to them. We're not asking for anything. We're not asking for a special exception for Zak. We're just asking to honor the contract that we made with him. The terms of the deal they're in black and white, and Zak upheld his part of that contract. And so if we're not a nation who honors our promises, for a nation who leaves our allies, we'll find it very difficult to succeed in the next big fight. And if history tells us anything, there will be the next big fight. And so I think what we can do is demand some accountability for the people who make these promises and say, hey, what are we doing to support the 87,000 Afghans who were eligible for this visa, who applied for it and are still in Afghanistan? And what are we doing for the ones that are here who still haven't had it approved? I think those are fair questions to ask of folks.
How many besides Zak are there estimated that they're in the sort of in his kind of situation?
Yeah, in terms of how many in the U.S., I don't know. I know there's a figure out right now that 87,000 SIV applicants are still in Afghanistan. Many of them have already been executed. And not only is it the 87,000, but the program includes immediate family, so wife and children. And so when you add in that figure, it balloons up to about 150,000 folks who should be afforded an opportunity to come to this country based on their service, based on their now persecution because of that service. That's kind of the figure we're looking at.
And now specifically for Zak, you've got a GoFundMe set up to kind of help with some of the cost involved because, like, immigration lawyers aren't free, things of that nature. What else? Should we write our Congress, our senators and local congressmen? Do you think that's going to help? I mean, what? Because I'm sure, like you, Tom, I want to know what can I do to fix the problem, right? Because sometimes you feel like if I'm talking to the wrong person, nothing's going to get done, and I'll go over their head.
Sure, Zak is living in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Antonio with his 5 children and his wife. He works hanging drywall for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week at a cancer hospital. So he's doing what immigrants have always done in this country, and they've taken the tough job. They've helped continue to build this great country that we live in. And so we want to continue to support him in any way that we can. One way is obviously financially. One way is to buy the book. One way might be the GoFundMe. But I mean, look, we have a moral obligation to keep pressing this issue. And so you should use all paths and means and tools available to continue to say, how are we honoring this moral obligation that we have to these folks?
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. So we are on Amazon. So they tell us, not to promote other sites, and GoFundMe would be one of them. But on the other places, we do have in the show notes the direct link to the GoFundMe if this is touching you. So and if you are on Amazon and once the show's over and you're done shopping on Amazon, feel free to type helpzak.dealcasters.live, and that'll take you to the GoFundMe. But while you're on Amazon, if you go to alwaysfaithful.dealcasters.live, make sure you pick up the book, Always Faithful. We said that you're the author, but it's actually co-authored, and it is a really interesting, I don't think I've ever read a book, Major, where it's alternating between two voices, chapter to chapter. It was just so that's really interesting because it's like you get to the end of one chapter and you're compelled, but then it's like, oh wow, this is a different viewpoint from Tom. This is a different viewpoint from Zak. So I thought that was a really cool, original, creative way of putting the book together for sure. Plus, you only have to write half of it, right?
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned up front, we also had the support of Worth, even if he's coming in the comments talking a little trash. But I think it was it's important for the American public to receive the education that Zak provides in his chapter, and so it's something that has been part of our collective conscious for the last 20 years. This Afghanistan, this. Somewhere, something over there. And to have, rather than me, a guy who spent about 17 months there, say, hey, here's what this country is all about. You've got a guy who was born there, raised there, spent his whole life there, invested everything he could into the success of this country. And so to me, it makes a lot more sense to have that perspective there so that we can really get a much fuller and a much deeper picture of what this country was all about. And Zak paints it in many ways as just a beautiful, beautiful place with a beautiful culture. And so I think that's part of what makes this book unique is that you get that other lens, that other perspective into Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yep. Very true. And Tom, you have an Instagram account, right? That people can follow you on, I think.
Sure. And that's where we started this appeal. When I was at Georgetown, I did a capstone project where I was trying to work through these trauma narratives that were around veterans and work through some of the mental health stuff with all kind of part of this capstone project from Georgetown. And as you know, there's where when someone is ambushed, the specific point of the ambush is called the kill zone. And so I thought we've got to be more resilient because everybody experiences the ambush. Like Chris was talking about, everybody has that need for tribe and purpose. It's a universal mankind need, and everybody, not just veterans, end up having a traumatic experience happen in their life. Everybody has that ambush, whether it's a car accident, cancer, something unexpected happened, and you're going to have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And so I started this page, Kill Zone, to kind of say, how can we be more resilient when these ambushes happen? And then how can we find that pathway to recovery? Because if it hasn't happened already, it is going to happen. And so that ambush is coming to us all, and probably more than one. And so I wanted to kind of have some discourse in and around resiliency, recovery, the mental health aspect. And so that's where this page, Kill Zone, KIL.Z0N3 came from. And I chronicled Zak's escape attempts there last year, and it definitely amplified the issues that we were experiencing there. And so that's where I kind of still keep updates about Zak and about what's going on that page.
Awesome. Yeah. So make sure you follow that, folks. We're going to add that in the comments as well for those of you that use Instagram. It is a thing outside of Facebook. Tom, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today. I hope that this is able to help as part of this journey to get Zak, back, able to stay here and not have to worry about what's next for him and his family. I know, right? They always say, I want to thank you for everything you've done as a Marine, and want to wish you continued success in whatever you're pursuing next in your career here. I guess you might be up for Lieutenant Colonel soon, I'm thinking, or getting close to those times.
Yep. And thank you for your service and everything you've done. And thank you both for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Semper Fi.
Appreciate it, Major.
Rough.
Yes, sir. It should make mention, there's a ton of people here in the chat that are fans of yours. Major Tanya, Dawn, thank you for chiming in. She's got all kinds of feels here in the chat. Jarhead 6 Rides, our friend, also Marine, says Semper Fi, hoorah. Here, Jarhead 6 Rides, that's Fabian. He'll watch the replay later. Apparently he was live streaming on Amazon during. What are you thinking? I mean, this is like your show, Fabian. And tons of other great chats here. So again, make sure you pick up the book, Always Faithful, the story of war in Afghanistan, the Fall of Kabul, and the unshakable bond between a Marine and the interpreter, Zak. And again, thank you, both you gentlemen, for your service. Major, thank you for joining us today on the show. And as always, folks, don't fear the gear.
Thanks for listening to Dealcasters. Congratulations, you've taken another step forward in your content creation journey. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe or follow button here in your favorite podcast player so you can be reminded every time we drop an episode.
We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. And if you're wanting to watch our shows live on Amazon, feel free to follow Dealcasters Live as well at dealcasters.live. Follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we also included added content that you cannot find anywhere else.
If you have questions about this episode or have something you want us to review, you can also email us at dealcasters@dealcasters.live. Thanks again for listening, and you know the deal. Don't fear the gear.